I never wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to paint. That truth echoed louder than ever as I stood in the wide, marble-tiled corridor of Havenbrook Medical Center, watching a crowd of staff and visitors gather around a painting in the hospital's newly renovated lobby. Bold, sweeping brush strokes in crimson and cobalt, layered over soft ivory. Abstract to some, electric to others. Emotional to anyone who truly looked. No plaque with my name. No clue to the artist's identity. Just a silent masterpiece titled Pulse, hung proudly beside a bronze dedication plate, donated by an anonymous patron to support mental health initiatives. They didn't know it was mine. Not the nurses snapping photos. Not the patients leaning on their walkers, whispering about how beautiful it was. Not the director shaking hands with board members as he praised the generous donor. And certainly not the two people standing closest to the canvas, my parents. My mother tilted her head, inspecting it with the same detached precision she used when analyzing CT scans. Interesting color choices, she murmured. But abstract arts always felt messy. Emotional, without structure. My father nodded. $2 million for splashes of paint. We could have bought a new MRI scanner. I bit the inside of my cheek. The hospital hadn't spent a dime. That donation? It was the revenue from a private sale I made last month, routed through my gallery's foundation. Silent, strategic, intentional. Their eyes moved on, but mine stayed fixed to the canvas. That piece had come from a place I couldn't explain in words. Created at 3 a.m. in my secret studio, just hours after watching a patient flatline in, or 6. I'd gone home and painted instead of sleeping. Layers upon layers of color and chaos until I felt something inside me loosen. Pulse wasn't just art. It was how I survived. But no one in this hospital knew that. By day, I was Dr. Elina Lin, third-year resident in internal medicine, top of my class, fastest chart note writer, on track to follow in my parents' illustrious footsteps. By night, I was E-Sky, an anonymous artist whose work hung in private galleries in Paris, Tokyo, and New York. My pieces had been featured in Art Weekly, auctioned at Sotheby's, and sold to celebrities who had no idea the person behind the canvas also knew how to resuscitate a failing heart. They couldn't know, because E-Sky was bold, emotional, free, and Elina Lin was supposed to be everything but. My parents, both senior physicians here at Havenbrook, still believed they'd saved me from a wasted life when they tore up my art school acceptance letter at 18. I remember the look on my father's face when he saw the envelope from the East Coast Institute of Visual Arts. Not pride, not surprise, but disgust. There's no stability in art, he had said, as if stability ever comforted a drowning soul. We didn't work this hard to raise a starving painter, my mother had added. And so, I did what a good daughter does. I folded my dreams into small, tight pieces, shoved them somewhere deep, and put on the white coat. But dreams don't die that easily. They just go quiet. For a while. In the second year of medical school, I picked up a brush again. Just once, I told myself. Just one painting. I used an old name I had signed on childhood sketches, E-Sky, and emailed a photo of the finished piece to a tiny gallery 2 boroughs over, attaching a single line. Not looking for fame, just want to paint. The gallery owner called me that same night. 2 weeks later, the piece sold for $8,000. I almost cried, not from the money but from the fact that someone out there saw what I saw, felt what I felt. And from that moment on, I never stopped. Between 36-hour shifts, I painted. I painted heartbreak after breaking the news of a terminal diagnosis. I painted exhaustion after triple back-to-back codes. I painted joy after saving a child who wasn't supposed to make it. I painted the things I couldn't say with a stethoscope. No one in the hospital was ever suspected. My studio was under a different name. My schedule perfectly manipulated to avoid art shows, interviews, and press appearances. E-Sky was a ghost. And that mystery only made collectors more obsessed. Last year, one of my paintings sold for $3.7 million. That's more than most doctors make in a decade. But I still woke up at 5 a.m. every day. Still performed my rounds. Still played the daughter who made her parents proud. It was easier than telling them the truth, that the part of me they tried to kill off had become my salvation. I stared at my painting one last time, the vibrant colors almost humming against the sterile hospital walls. Around me, life went on. A nurse pushed a medication cart. A surgeon barked orders into a phone. My parents laughed with another physician, praising my last case report as if that were the only legacy that mattered. And none of them knew. Not one. They forced me into this life. But what they don't know is that I made millions doing what they told me was a waste of time. I still remember the smell of turpentine and oil paints in my childhood bedroom. The way the sunlight spilled through the east-facing window in the late afternoon, casting golden slants across my sketchbooks. That room, tucked in the far end of our two-story house in the suburbs, was the only space that ever truly felt like mine. I was 15 when I started painting seriously. At first, I hid it like a secret crush, sketching between chemistry homework, dabbing colors on cheap canvas scraps after my parents had gone to bed. By 16, I had already submitted 3 pieces to national youth art contests under a fake name. I used an old email account and mailed the applications from the post office across town, afraid someone at the local branch would recognize my mother's name. They all won. One of them, a charcoal portrait of a young woman staring into a shattered mirror, was even displayed in a touring exhibition that stopped in Boston. I begged a friend's older sister to drive us there just to see it. I stood in the corner for nearly an hour, watching people stare at my work, watching them feel something. That was the first time I realized my art could speak even when I couldn't. But I never told my parents. Not about the competitions, not about the awards, not about the professor at the gallery who told me I had the raw intensity of someone twice my age. I was too scared, too aware of what their reaction would be. Still, when I got the acceptance letter from the East Coast Institute of Visual Arts, I dared to hope. I had applied in secret, gathering recommendation letters from teachers who believed in me, using prize money to pay the application fees. And somehow, impossibly, they had given me a full scholarship. Tuition, room, board. Everything is covered. The letter said I had the potential to be one of the greats. My hands shook as I held the envelope, standing at the edge of the kitchen where my parents were setting the table. I didn't even get the words out before my father noticed it in my hands. "What's that?" he asked. I handed it over before I could think twice. I still remember the way his eyes scanned the letter. How his expression shifted, confusion, then disbelief, and then something cold. "You applied to art school?" His voice cut through the air like a blade. "It's one of the best in the country," I said softly. "They offered me a full scholarship. Everything." They said My mother didn't let me finish. "Absolutely not." Her tone was flat, final. "I don't understand," I said, panic rising in my throat. "You always said you'd support me if I worked hard for something. I've been working toward this for years." "To waste your life?" My father exploded. "No daughter of mine is going to throw away her future smearing paint on a canvas. What kind of job will you get? What kind of life?" "You think this is a joke?" my mother added, arms crossed, expression tight. "You want to end up like your cousin Rebecca? Selling handmade earrings at street fairs? Is that what this is about?" "I'm not Rebecca," I said. "And I've already sold 3 pieces online. People are buying my work." My father slammed the letter down onto the kitchen table. "This conversation is over. You're going to Preston University. You're taking the pre-med track. That's what we planned. That's what we invested in." "You planned it," I whispered, tears rising fast. "I never asked for it." "Enough," he said. "You don't know what's best for you yet. We do. You'll thank us later." That night, I sat on the edge of my bed with the acceptance letter in one hand and a trembling pen in the other. The dorm room, the studio, the life I wanted, it all blurred in front of me. In the end, I declined the offer. Not because I changed my mind, but because I couldn't bear the look of disappointment in my father's eyes, or the wall of silence I knew my mother would build if I defied them. I was 17. I still needed to belong somewhere, even if it meant giving up the thing I loved most. But I couldn't stop painting. Not completely. That part of me was too alive to kill. So instead, I became someone else. Med school was everything they said it would be: grueling, relentless, and utterly consuming. From the moment I stepped into Preston Medical as a first-year student, my life became a carefully choreographed performance. I woke before sunrise, reviewed anatomy notes over instant coffee, and spent 10-hour days rotating between lectures, labs, and hospital floors. I memorized disease pathways like poetry. I kept my white coat spotless. I became the student every professor praised and every classmate envied. But when the sun went down and the halls of the hospital fell quiet, I transformed. In a studio apartment across town, one I paid for in cash and rented under a different name, the white coat came off. The brushes came out. I'd strip off my scrubs, wash the antiseptic smell from my hands, and pick up where my soul had left off the night before, on canvas. That studio, tucked in a converted warehouse near the river, was mine and mine alone. No hospital, no expectations, just paint and silence. I called myself E-Sky. It started as a whisper of rebellion. I created the alias late one night after a particularly brutal rotation in trauma surgery, where I watched a 19-year-old boy die on the table and had to deliver the news to his mother with a voice I wasn't sure belonged to me. I walked home in the rain that night, every breath tight in my chest, and when I arrived at the studio, I didn't even bother changing clothes. I just grabbed a canvas and started painting. I painted the sound of the flatline, the color of his mother's scream, the burn of adrenaline in my veins. I painted until my hands shook and my eyes blurred. And when it was finished, I didn't recognize what I had made, but I knew it mattered. That painting became the first I ever submitted as E-Sky. I photographed it in the dim light of the studio, cropped out my hospital badge still clipped to my top, and sent it to a small underground gallery I had discovered online. No bio, no face, just a note, anonymous submission. Not for display unless accepted. They replied the next day. They wanted it. Badly. And so began the quiet rhythm of my secret life. Days were for medicine, shifts that ran too long, mentors who pushed too hard, endless hours in cold, bright rooms that smelled of disinfectant and despair. I learned how to make incisions, how to stitch wounds, how to keep my voice level even when my heart raced. But nights were for survival. I painted every emotion I couldn't explain. Grief, rage, fear, joy, loneliness. Every unspoken word from patients. Every time I felt like screaming. Every time I saved a life and still felt empty after. It all spilled from me onto the canvas. I used every dollar of my tiny stipend on supplies, canvas, brushes, oils. I stopped going out. Stopped answering questions I didn't want to lie about. I was always just tired or on call. No one knew I was spending nights covered in paint, not blood. The contrast was jarring. At the hospital, I wore gloves stained red from hours of stitching wounds closed, saving lives by sheer focus and control. At the studio, my hands were stained violet and teal, fingertips coated in emotion I couldn't afford to feel anywhere else. There were nights when the exhaustion nearly crushed me, when I'd sleep for 2 hours curled on the studio floor before dragging myself to morning rounds. Nights when I questioned if I could keep both lives alive. But then I'd finish a painting, step back, and see something real, something that couldn't be charted or diagnosed or graded. And I'd know, this is what keeps me breathing. Over time, E-Sky became more than a pseudonym. She became my lifeline. The gallery started selling more of my work, quietly, privately. Buyers were intrigued by the anonymity. One critic even called me the rawest new voice in abstract emotion. I read the review between 4 checks on a patient with renal failure. No one knew the artist who made them was also learning to resuscitate hearts. My studio filled with canvas after canvas, emotion layered on color layered on memory. And yet, I still walked through the hospital like I had nothing to hide, like I hadn't just painted someone's final breath the night before. And then one day, a single painting changed everything. The email came late on a Tuesday night, buried between medical journal updates and residency announcement. The subject line was simple: "Your work is brilliant. Let's talk." It was from Julian Reeve, one of the most respected art critics in the country, known for making or breaking careers with a single review. I thought it was a prank at first. But as I read the message, something shifted inside me. He wasn't just offering praise, he was offering a spotlight. "I saw your latest piece at the Underground Gallery," he wrote. "You have a surgical precision in the way you cut into emotion. It's raw, visceral, emotionally surgical. You're doing something that's never been done before. Who are you?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding, paint still drying on my fingertips. I didn't reply. I couldn't. But that one email turned a ripple into a tidal wave. The gallery updated my profile the next morning, still anonymous, still just E-Sky, but now with the quote from Reeve on the homepage. Within 24 hours, 4 pieces had sold. Within a week, I was fielding private offers through my agent Marcus, who had handled my submissions from day one, never once asking who I really was. He didn't want to know. Mysteries sold better. Collectors, celebrities, hedge fund moguls, they all wanted a piece of the elusive artist who painted like she had seen death up close. And I had. In the hospital, every shift brought me closer to the parts of humanity most people avoided. Suffering, joy, loss, desperation. I funneled all of it into my work, and now the world was beginning to see it. But they still didn't see me. One particular piece, a chaotic splash of reds and muted golds, titled Pulse Interrupted, sold for $1.8 million. The buyer? A global tech billionaire who said it felt like a heart attack and rebirth at once. He had no idea the artist had been on call for a real cardiac arrest the night she painted it. I funneled much of the income into causes I believed in: art therapy programs, women's shelters, free clinics. One anonymous donation funded the renovation of an entire children's ward in a community hospital across the city. I signed the transfer papers for my studio floor while drinking gas station coffee and finishing up patient notes on my laptop. My real name was never on the wire. Back at the hospital, I lived like every other resident, sleep-deprived, overworked, barely surviving. My colleagues thought I was frugal, a little antisocial, too obsessed with patient charts. No one questioned it. They were too busy trying to stay afloat themselves. My parents, meanwhile, never stopped bragging. "Our daughter Elina is a doctor at Riverside Memorial," my mother would say at every dinner party. "Top of her class. She's saving lives." They never asked if I was happy. Never questioned the dark circles under my eyes or the fact that I hadn't dated in years. They had gotten what they wanted, a daughter in a white coat. And I had given them exactly that on the surface. But beneath it, I was living another life entirely. A life full of private gallery invitations, wire transfers in 7 figures, and critics calling me the defining voice of my generation. I had bought a penthouse downtown. I paid for it in full, under a shell company created for E-Sky. I never stepped foot in it. I still slept on the lumpy mattress in my studio apartment, the place that had seen every brushstroke, every breakdown, every triumph. Then came the moment that changed everything. I was walking through the hospital lobby after a 28-hour shift, eyelids heavy, coat stained with coffee and ink, when I saw it. The installation team was carefully mounting a massive painting on the main wall. I stopped mid-step. My breath caught. It was mine. Silent Resuscitation, a piece I'd painted after watching a child flatline and come back to life against every odds. I'd submitted it to Marcus without fanfare months ago. It sold almost immediately. There, in the heart of the hospital where I worked every day, my painting was being hung with a brass plaque beneath it. I stepped closer, squinting at the words etched into the metal. Healing through Art Initiative, artist, E-Sky, donated anonymously. My knees nearly buckled. $2 million. The hospital had purchased the painting as part of a new campaign to integrate emotional wellness into patient care. It was being celebrated in press releases, donor emails, even internal newsletters. Everyone was talking about the painting. No one knew the artist stood just 20 feet away, covered in 3-day-old eyeliner and scrub pants. And in that moment, I felt it. My worlds weren't just close anymore. They were colliding. The hospital lobby was filled with applause, polite chatter, and the faint echo of camera shutters as administrators, donors, and doctors gathered to unveil the latest acquisition in their Healing Through Art initiative. A scarlet velvet drape had been pulled from the massive canvas, just moments earlier, revealing silent resuscitation in all its chaotic, beautiful depth. Bold strokes of crimson collided with soft waves of teal, anchored by a single line of gold that pulsed across the center, like a heartbeat suspended in time. The crowd marveled. The chief of surgery gave a glowing speech. The head of pediatrics called it emotionally transformative. Everyone was talking about the mysterious artist Sky, how their work had transcended traditional medical art, how it captured the raw pulse of life and death in a way no textbook ever could. I stood in the back, still in my white coat, half hidden behind a structural column, heart hammering in my chest. My painting, my work, on the wall of the very hospital where I made rounds every day, walked these halls, delivered news both good and devastating. No one around me knew, not even my parents, who stood at the front of the crowd. My mother leaned over to my father, her lips pursed with the precision she usually reserved for surgical critiques. "It's intense," she whispered. "Why would they spend $2 million on this? It looks like chaos." My father crossed his arms. "Probably some overhyped artist trying to shock people. Hospitals should stick to landscapes. At least those are calming." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. They didn't know. They had no idea their daughter's hands had painted every inch of that chaos. That the overhyped artist they dismissed was the same daughter they proudly told everyone was too focused on medicine to even have hobbies. That was when my phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, my gallery agent. "Urgent. Call me now. Press is onto you." I stepped out of the lobby and into a quiet hallway, my fingers trembling as I dialed. Marcus answered on the first ring. "They know," he said. "Or they think they do." One of the reporters at the Times reached out, claimed someone from the hospital tipped them off. "They've been comparing your shift schedule to Sky's shows. Says it's too coincidental." My stomach twisted. "What do they want?" I whispered. "A statement. In the next hour. Confirm or deny. Otherwise, they're publishing with what they have." I pressed a hand to the cool wall behind me to steady myself. "They can't," I murmured, as if saying it aloud would stop the truth from catching fire. "They can. And they will," Marcus said. "If you want to stay anonymous, we have to shut this down hard. Maybe pull your work from galleries, go dark. But even then it might be too late." I could hear the weight behind his words. My double life, so carefully protected for 6 years, was beginning to crumble. I hung up without responding and just stood there, in the quiet corridor between the pediatric unit and radiology, trying to breathe. I had spent years walking this line, playing 2 roles. Elina Lin, dutiful doctor. Sky, silent rebel with a brush. I'd lived in fear that the line would blur too far, that someone would recognize a fragment of themselves in a painting, that my night world would bleed into my day life. Now it was happening. If I denied it, I could try to erase Sky, let her fade away, hide behind the scrubs and stethoscope and be who my parents wanted, who the hospital expected. Safe. Small. But if I confirm it, I didn't know what came next. Would I be fired? Judged? Branded a fraud? Would my parents ever forgive me for the deception? Would they even understand? I looked down at my paint-stained cuticles, hidden beneath clean gloves. The ID clipped to my coat. And I thought about all the nights I stood in my studio pouring out emotions no one ever let me say aloud. Thought about the child whose life inspired silent resuscitation and the tears I cried after saving him. Not because I was a doctor, but because I felt something too deep for words. I thought about what it cost me to be both, and what it would cost to lose either. 1 hour. I had 1 hour to decide. And so, with my heart racing, I reached for my phone. Because I had made my decision. The grand ballroom of the Lexington Hotel shimmered under 1,000 crystal lights, alive with the clink of champagne glasses and the low hum of polite conversation. The hospital's annual gala had always been the crown jewel of its social calendar, a glittering evening of donors, doctors, and power plays. But tonight, the air was different. Rumors had already started swirling. Everyone was talking about Sky. Some said the artist might attend in person for the first time ever. Some whispered about leaks, about secrets. Others dismissed it as gossip. but none of them were prepared for what happened next. The music paused. Heads turned as the double doors at the back of the ballroom slowly opened, and I stepped through. No lab coat, no stethoscope, just me, Elina Lin, in a floor-length midnight blue gown I had painted by hand. Brush strokes of silver stars swept across the silk, trailing down the train like falling comets. My hair flowed freely over my shoulders, my makeup subtle, my expression calm, even as my chest tightened with every step toward the stage. The room fell silent. Doctors who knew me as the quiet, brilliant resident. Administrators who called me the future of internal medicine. Donors who had smiled politely at me for years without ever remembering my name. And my parents, seated front and center, stared at me like I was a stranger who had just walked into their carefully constructed life. I stopped at the podium, took one breath, and said, "I'm Sky." The room gasped. Somewhere, a champagne glass shattered on the floor. My mother's hand flew to her chest. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She swayed slightly in her seat, and the woman beside her grabbed her arm. My father's jaw clenched. His eyes locked onto mine, not in recognition, but in disbelief. Then slowly he stood, and without a word, he walked out of the ballroom. The silence was deafening. Reporters leapt from their tables, cameras flashing. "Dr. Lin, when did you start painting? Is this a career stunt? How long have you been lying in your hospital?" The crowd erupted into chaos. Behind me, I heard the board members whispering, "We can't accept the painting if this is true. She misled us. We have to go to the hospital immediately. This could be a scandal." I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I stepped back to the microphone. "I know this is a shock," I said, my voice steady despite the quiver I felt deep inside. "But I want to tell you the truth, my truth." The reporters paused. The murmurs softened. "I never stopped being a doctor," I said. "But I also never stopped being an artist. For 6 years, I lived a double life because I thought I had to choose. I believed I had to hide the part of me that made people uncomfortable. That loving two things, medicine and art, made me dishonest. That wanting to heal bodies and paint souls somehow made me less worthy." I looked directly at the board members who were already discussing how to spin this. "You want to know how Sky captured human pain so precisely?" I asked. "Because I saw it. Every day. In ERs. In ICUs. In waiting rooms full of hope and grief. My art wasn't a rebellion, it was a response. It was the only way I knew how to carry what I saw." My voice dropped lower. I didn't paint because I was bored. I painted to breathe. I painted to survive. The room was still there. Even the flashbulbs had stopped. "I never stopped being a doctor," I repeated. "I just became the kind of healer I needed to be." And then, through the silence, a voice rose behind me. Firm, familiar. "My daughter," it said, "has always healed in ways I couldn't begin to understand." The crowd turned. My father stood at the back of the ballroom. His white coat was gone. His face was unreadable. But his eyes were no longer filled with disbelief. They were filled with awe. My father slowly made his way down the aisle of the ballroom, each step heavy with emotion. The crowd parted as he passed, whispers trailing behind him. When he finally reached the stage, he didn't climb up. He stood at the base, looking up at me like he was truly seeing me for the first time in his life. His voice was quiet, but clear. "I used to think medicine was the only way to save a life. But tonight, I saw the pain you carried in your work, the sorrow, the silence. And I realized I never saved you from any of it." I swallowed hard. My heart clenched, not from fear, but from a grief that had waited 6 long years to be named. "You didn't have to save me," I whispered. "I just wanted you to see me." My mother stood now, slowly, as if her legs had forgotten how. Her hands trembled as she stepped beside my father. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice softer than I'd ever heard, she said, "I spent your whole life trying to shape your future, Elina. And I never once stopped to ask what your heart wanted. Until tonight. I didn't understand. I thought I knew you, but I only knew the part that wore the white coat." Tears blurred my vision as I looked down at them. The parents who had raised me with rules, with pride, with expectations so heavy they nearly broke me. And yet here they were, unraveling those expectations in front of hundreds of people. For me, behind us, the board members held a rushed, whispered vote. When the director returned to the mic, she looked out at the crowd with a composed smile. "The board has decided," she said. "We will honor our purchase of Sky's piece, now titled Heartlines, and the funds will still be donated to the pediatric unit. But with one change, the unit will now carry a new name, the Elina Lin Healing Arts Wing." The room erupted in applause. I stood frozen, stunned by the echo of my name, both of them, finally spoken together in the same sentence. Weeks later, the hospital launched a new program, Healing Through Expression, blending art therapy into medical care. They asked me to lead it. I said yes, not instead of medicine, but alongside it. My research into trauma-informed care now sits beside my canvases. My white coat still waits in the locker room. My studio still smells like linseed oil and lavender. I walk between both worlds now. I've stopped hiding. There's no shame in being two things. No weakness in needing both logic and color, science and soul. And maybe I never needed to choose. My father visits the new wing often. My mother started taking beginner art classes on the weekends. And me? I signed my last painting with both names, Dr. Elina Lin, also known as Sky. On the wall of my home studio, right beside the window, hangs a white coat, and beside it, a paint-splattered apron. For the first time in my life, they're side by side. And that's enough. Have you ever felt pressure to follow a path that wasn't truly yours? Tell us your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how you found your way back to yourself. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more powerful, emotional stories that speak to the soul. Every like, comment, and share helps us create more content that truly matters. Let's build a community where real stories are celebrated.